Hi, I'm Sanaya.
And I'm Ketki.
And we're Thinking People. Today, we're thinking about cricket, the sport, the religion, the institution. We trace its place in our history, our politics, our collective imagination, and ask, what does cricket really tell us about India?
Life moves fast. Tune in to think about it. Hello. Sorry for the delay today. I I have had a little bit of a crazy manic morning because I was like, okay, I want to go into this episode a little bit prepped. Because as you know, I'm personally not the biggest cricket fan, and for some part of this episode, I reached out to a mutual friend of ours to ask him to help me with a few things, and he sent me a few notes, and I was like, "What is this? What does any of this even mean?"
Did he send lots of notes?
Yeah, he sent a lot of notes which had a lot of like hyper specific, like technical points, and I was like, "Dude."
You had to do research to understand the notes.
I had to do research to understand the notes because they become relevant at a later part in this episode, which I will get to when I get to. But okay, to introduce this episode today, we are thinking about cricket, but more specifically, I'm interviewing you about cricket. For our listeners, those of who don't know, because we've never really spoken about this topic on the podcast before. Sanaya is a cricket aficionado, and
yes,
I would say she knows a lot about cricket.
Okay, fun fact, I was almost about to wear my New Zealand cricket jersey for this recording.
You know, I was going to ask you to do that, either that one or your cap.
Yeah, I have both, but then eventually I decided to just wear black.
Yeah,
I wore my New Zealand cricket cap to the final last week. Some friends were watching it in a bar, and we went for the first innings, and there were people wearing the India jersey, and I walked in like wearing a black top with the New Zealand cap, and there was this, let's say, middle-aged man who said, "Are you serious? Are you kidding me?"
No way, really?
Yeah. I mean, he was a part of the group that we were meeting. And
Does your blood not bleed blue, Sanaya?
I mean, we will see through this conversation that I would not say that I'm not a Indian cricket fan. I am. It's just that when you are a fan of the sport and the game, these things, it's not about it's not about supporting India, right? It's about the game. It's sounding pretentious, but I guess that's what I think we will dive into, some of those aspects about cricket as a sport and a game, and then get to what it means to be an Indian cricket fan as well.
So going back to what I was saying, the reason I am interviewing you is because through the course of our friendship, I've seen, at least like I've known you now for 10 years, so I've seen your evolving relationship with cricket, but you've also told me a lot about your historical relationship with cricket, which I want you to speak to more than anything else. But what became apparent very quickly to me as I was witnessing this was that it's played a special role in your life in some of the other way, in terms of like just it being there in the background, being a source of like obsession, being a source of intellectual debate even, and also something that you sort of like maybe weren't following as much and then returned to, right? So I think you've had your own sort of unique journey with cricket. So to sort of maybe let's start there, right? Like, can you give us a little snapshot into what your personal relationship and journey with cricket has been like?
Yeah. I'm going to start this with a disclaimer because I have a feeling that this episode is going to draw the attention of some cricket bros. And just a quick anecdote, I joined Reddit, I guess, like a few years ago, and I wanted to post a question in the R Cricket subreddit, and the moderators rejected my question, saying that it needs to add substantially to the debate, you know?
Right.
So the podcasting world and the Reddit forum world of cricket is chock full of bros with very, very like strong opinions. So we're entering that space with that episode.
Can they handle two women, and by two I mean mostly you, talking about cricket? Well, let's find out.
In my personal experience of talking to dudes about cricket, the results may vary. But okay. So to answer your question, I would say, and this is the disclaimer, that I'm going to talk about when I entered cricket, my entry point into cricket.
Yeah.
For a lot of the men in our age group, their entry point is probably the late 90s, early 2000s, the era that was dominated by Sachin Tendulkar, Rahul Dravid, Saurav Ganguly, particularly the 2003 World Cup, where India reached the final, but lost to Australia quite famously. I've seen that World Cup final. I remember the level of excitement within my family. We were watching it, but it was incredibly disappointing because Australia scored 369. We barely touched like 240 or something. Sachin gets out in like the second over. He scores like one boundary and gets out. It was a disappointing World Cup. But my serious engagement began when I was a bit older with the 2011 World Cup.
Right.
Which, as everybody knows, is the one that we won. However, as people would have gotten this sense at the beginning of this episode, I enjoy being a contrarian and a bit of a troll. So how it began was me kind of wanting to troll my friends and family members by like celebrating when another team was doing well. Like I was just doing it for fun. You know what I mean? And that went on for the entirety of the World Cup. But what began as me sort of like poking fun at people turned into me suddenly like absorbing all the rules of cricket, all the intricacies. It's an incredibly complicated game with a lot of jargon, as you mentioned, lots of technical terms which sound like gibberish to people who have nothing to do with the sport. So when the World Cup ended, I felt like this emptiness in my life. I'm like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And this is 2011. This is also the year that I finished my 10th standard board exams, right? And the World Cup was happening during the board exams. And in the life of an Indian child, you are thinking about your board exams for 5 years before they actually happen. That's just what it's like, okay?
Yeah.
And definitely for the 2 years before the board exams, because they're like, oh my God, your entire future is dependent on this.
Yeah.
And once they end, once they get over, it's like you have this like brief period of freedom, which is 11th standard. Okay. 11th standard is infamously the year in which you can do whatever you want. And before 11th standard is the summer break where you don't know where you're going. Your results have to come. And in Pune especially, a lot of schools did not have like 11th and 12th. My school did.
Right.
So I needed to go somewhere else. So I was at a loose end after my board exams. There was nothing to do. And what fills that void after the World Cup? It's the IPL.
Oh.
It's the IPL. So I am this like almost 16-year-old who has nothing to do. And suddenly I switch on the TV and there are 2 games a day. And I'm like, oh, wow, I can just keep watching cricket. So I kept watching. I watched every single match. Okay. And it also helped that I wasn't an incredibly like social 16-year-old. I wasn't that interested in going out and meeting people. So then I watched every IPL game.
Yeah.
And the thing about cricket, and I guess we'll get into this like later in the conversation, is that the commentary is as important as what's going on in the match, right? And because of the pace of cricket, the fact that you have breaks after every over, it just opens up opportunities to chat about the game. So I learned a lot by just listening to the commentary. And then suddenly I am aware of the jargon. I understand the tactics. And then I have opinions on the tactics, right? Then the IPL ends. And now there's a void again. What am I supposed to do? I just got used to, like I was getting like cricket like directly in my veins for like the last 2 months. What do I replace that with? And then I watched the Sri Lanka tour of England, which was happening that summer.
Right.
So then what essentially happened is I just wanted to watch whatever cricket was on. Right. And then that quickly turned into me like watching any test match, right? I remember watching like a one-off like New Zealand versus Zimbabwe match. There was this one time in 11th standard, that's when Delhi Belly had come out, and like some of our classmates had decided to watch Delhi Belly and they wanted to hang out at McDonald's after that. And I said, no, I have to go home. And they said, why? And I said, I need to watch like the second innings of the New Zealand versus Sri Lanka match or something like that. Okay.
Right.
So I was doing this kind of shit very early on. And then that kind of turned into me just switching. Like if I switched on the TV, I would go to like, there were like dedicated channels for cricket. There was
Right.
something called Star Cricket and 10 Cricket. You
Yeah.
switch it on, you're either watching highlights or you're watching whatever's live. I've
Yeah.
seen like English county games randomly.
Right.
And then this is what a lot of like bros say to prove their bona fides for like why they're cricket fans. You start waking up in the morning to watch matches in Australia and New Zealand. So I did
Yeah.
that. I used to wake up at 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning, watch a match, and then go to school.
Right.
And then when I was in school, I have no cell phone. And if we had one, I mean, I had a cell phone. You just weren't allowed to take it to school.
Yeah.
So I'd have to like go back home and then look up what's the score. And
Yeah.
because I'm looking up what's the score, I start following cricket news on Cricinfo, right? So that's how it began, I would say. But I think, yeah, you're right to say that I didn't realize this until I started like thinking about this question that, you know, in many ways, this fandom has actually, set the stage for my entire career in media and
Yeah.
communications. Like
Interesting.
I started a blog, like, I had
Yes.
a Blogspot blog because I had a lot to say,
The
know.
contents of which I've still not read, but I have asked you for. But can you retrieve it? Is it still like somewhere on the internet?
I saved everything, and I
Okay.
have some choice quotes which I can read out from some
Okay,
of my
amazing.
early blog writing. But yeah, I started a blog. I started my Twitter account to promote my blog. The first podcast I ever listened to was a cricket podcast. It was called Two Chucks, or the Chuck Fleetwood Smiths, a podcast show by a cricket analyst and writer called Jared Kimber, who's still very much active today, and this other
Yeah.
dude called Samson Collins. He seems to be doing like other kind of like direction production work of documentaries, not necessarily cricket based. But that was my first entry into podcasting, So yeah, I think it all began in
With
this
that.
way. But I did struggle with writing about cricket. So I had this very like dramatic moment where obviously I was like a 16, 17-year-old teenager with my own like issues. But I struggled with writing about it because I felt that no one would take me seriously because I was a girl. No one would take me seriously because I've never played. Right. So I wrote my blog for around a year and then like very dramatically decided I'm going to delete it because no one's going to take this seriously. So yeah, it did. I think it's very different being a female cricket fan today.
Now.
Yeah, it's definitely changed.
Yeah.
And a lot more women are like visible, not just as players, but also, in the commentary box. But like earlier, I think when I was growing up, you could kind of see the hand of the media system in which the presenters would be women, like, Mandira Bedi. That was from my childhood, Mandira Bedi. And then, of course, like Mayanti Langer also began back then. She's still a presenter. And for the IPL, it was, I think, Shabani Dandekar. And they were kind of using them as like, oh, that pretty face asking all these questions to these cricketers. And then, them having banter with each other.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of like cricket writing, they're the most visible writer, and she's still like one of the preeminent like cricket journalists, sports journalists, is Sharda Ugra.
Yeah.
She's written quite a bit about like cricket and India in general. But yeah, there weren't many role models or examples, even though, we had like a women's team. There were many like players who were actively playing cricket. It just wasn't visible or reaching a person like me.
Right.
So yeah,
were there any, like, did you have any readers like for your blog? Did people read your blog?
I mean, based on like Blogspot analytics, yeah. Like I had like, I used to get like, I guess like 50 to 60 readers, and sometimes it would go up to 100, and then it would be interesting to see what country they were from. And yeah, it was just interesting because this was also like early days of like blogging on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And it was surreal to imagine that you were writing something and someone was reading it. Like now you take it for granted that whatever you create, it reaches an audience.
Right.
The fact that you could have an audience was nuts. Like it was revolutionary. And I think I did have a few readers. Sometimes people would comment, but it didn't blow up or anything like that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have closed it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad that you had to, but maybe there's a potential for a revival at some point in the future.
Yeah, and now if you look at, like, if you're on Twitter, you'll see like there are a lot of women who, in their bios will be like, I'm a cricket girly, you know what I mean? And they'll
Yeah.
be like commenting on the game and stuff. And I sometimes like look at that and I'm like, whoa, I was the only like female cricket fan that I knew.
Yeah, this is. I mean, I do feel like this is the great thing about social media. At least is that like you feel like every once in a while you encounter a person in the wild and you're like, oh, they have similar interests, or they feel or think a thing that back in the day when you were writing your blog, you had no way of knowing or finding those other women who would have been interested in cricket, right? But like
Yeah.
if you had read it, maybe you would have found that rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. I think the thing that's coming up for me as you're speaking about this is that you fell in love with the sport
Yeah.
first. I think for a lot of other people, and like I myself am a casual cricket viewer in the sense that I don't follow really any of it except for like the World Cup, and that also really the ICC World Cup, because it's such an event, right? So you can't miss it.
Yeah.
Like to me, it's a media event over and above anything else. And on a personal like level, I've never really been into team sports. I like endurance sports more. I actually like watching the Olympics and like
Right.
watching like swimming and gymnastics and things like that. And that's also what I prefer playing in my personal life. So I find that more interesting. But team sport has always been like I have been curious about it, and being Indian, you can't escape cricket, right? Like it just is there. So there's so much that you imbibe. But it's interesting to me that your entry point into like cricket or like appreciating the sport was the commentary.
Yeah.
Because that is often the most complex part of the sport in the sense for the average viewer, where they're sort of exactly what I was saying in the beginning of this episode. They're talking about these very technical things, and I just tune it out. Like I am not really paying attention. But like I think that what's interesting about your journey is that like it really like seems to me that it's like a love for the sport first, and then for any team. And that's interesting because like for most of us, it's like, oh, India, let's like India's going to win today. So let's see if India's going to win.
Yeah.
At least that's my experience of it. But talk me through, like, we've now reached like sort of you writing your blog. And then I know that there was a period, at least like when we had met during our masters and a few years after that, where you sort of weren't following cricket as much.
Yeah.
Talk me through why, and also talk us through like what brought you back.
Yeah, no, that is like the final like piece of the story. But
yeah.
So I was consistently following cricket until around 2013. Like by consistent, I mean everything, like absorbing everything to do with it. And I feel like there's this one thing about cricket that it requires a lot of time, like time investment from a fan if you want to be watching the sport, right? So I think, like I said, I think like those 2 years, 2011 and 12, were like some of the most like leisurely years of my life, right? Like you're not doing much. 2013 is when I enter college, right? So once you start, like I mean, I would say that my desire for like stepping out of the house is what got in the way, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think following it asynchronously was something that was not very appealing to me. Like I wanted to actually be watching it and not just looking up the score all the time. And I mean, I guess like it's also like a difficult phase in your own, like, you know, you're lost in your late teens, early 20s. You kind of like cut yourself off from the things that you like and you love, and you try to be someone else. I feel like a lot of that happened to me. So I do think there was like a big gap of around like 10 years in which I wasn't consistently following it. I did watch all the World Cups. Like, you know, like I did watch, like it's not as if I wasn't aware of what was going on, where the game was going. I have seen the 2015 World Cup, maybe all the matches. I've seen all the matches in the 2019 World Cup as well, which were the World Cups in between. And you're vaguely aware of what's going on. But I will say like this is the period in which like Virat Kohli comes to prominence, right? He kind of emerges after the three like cricketing greats, Lakshman Dravid, Tendulkar retires, so he emerges, Rohit Sharma emerges, Ajinkya Rahane, Cheteshwar Pujara. Like these are the new teams, and like Ravichandran, Ashwin, Jadeja. Like this is the dominant team of the last 10 years that emerges in this period. What brought me back? I would say it's very random, but like after a long period of not being like in one place, I was moving around a lot. So in Delhi, when I had been here for around 2.5 years, in 2023, we're talking about baseball. And I was explaining what baseball is. So Brendan McCullum has been appointed England's head coach. And he came with a philosophy, which was revolutionary for English cricket, but it was something that was already happening in all other countries, all other former and it was already happening in former colonial nations, which is a more free-flowing, aggressive style of play, which English cricket, because of its own like historical baggage and their own like emotional baggage of having to be buttoned up and rule bound, was liberating for them. But essentially, this style of cricket that he kind of came with was like affectionately and is affectionately called Bazball, because his nickname is Baz, Brendan Baz McCullum. So this style of cricket was dominating headlines at the time, because the whole idea was that why have we just accepted some of these, norms of cricket, that the first one being that you have to play test cricket at a lower run rate to not score more than like 3 or 4 runs and over. Why do you have to play it slowly? When you're playing one-day cricket and T20 cricket more aggressively and like going at like 10 runs and over sometimes, why are we playing test cricket in the same way? So the idea was that if you can believe something, it will happen. It was very Ted Lasso-esque, for English cricket, that if you have to chase down 450 runs in the last innings of a test match, why can't you do it? Just score at 5 runs and over. You know what I mean? And for English cricket, this was revolutionary. The English media also likes to toot its own horn quite a bit. So this was like the stage that was set for this particular Ashes. It was happening in England. It was this, revitalized new English cricket team that had been like completely like decimated the last time it played in Australia. It lost all 5 matches. Right. Now you have like this new captain in Ben Stokes, who is also like this venerated hero of the last 10 years of English cricket. And you're playing against, and you have Brendan McCullum, this new style of play, and you have them playing against arch nemesis, Australia.
Yeah.
And it was a very closely fought series. It was ultimately tied 2-2. But England lost the first 2 matches. The third match was washed out. And they came back and won the final 2. And Australia ended up retaining the Ashes because they had won the previous one and this was drawn. So if you draw a series, the previous winner retains a cup. That's how it works in cricket.
Yeah.
But it was incredibly gripping to watch. And I also think that matches in England are best suited for viewing in terms of just time in India, because they start at 3:30 and end at 10:30. That's when you're like kind of done with your work, and as a student done with school, so you can watch the whole day's play. So after that is when I started following cricket a lot more closely again. And this is also the time period where Jasprit Bumrah kind of emerges. And Jasprit Bumrah is like is an actual national treasure. Like you would be hard pressed to find somebody who has anything to say about him. I'm sure that the new generation that's coming up now, like people can come up with like reasons for why Bumrah is overrated or whatever. But as of today, 2024 onwards, he is undeniably the best cricketer in the world, right? And this is very unlikely because India was never known for fast bowling. It was never known to be a fast bowling like giant or like a threat to other countries. The fact that Bumrah is the best fast bowler, and cricketer in the world is, I don't know, it's like this huge like story of redemption for Indian cricket, right? So it kind of like me coming back into cricket kind of merged with like Bumrah's heroics. And I think, since then there's like time, there's the accessibility, you're able to watch it. It's on Hotstar. You don't need a cable connection anymore. Like there was like a bit of a gap in the middle. Like how would you watch cricket if you didn't have a TV with like cable or satellite?
Yeah.
Streaming, like Hotstar hadn't decided to like buy rights to cricket just yet, right? There was a gap in the middle. So I think all of those things came together, and then I was like back into like watching cricket all the time.
As someone who gave up her blog because she felt like people wouldn't take her opinion seriously, which I feel like that's a, that I feel like that would be something that also adds to just your relationship with the sport overall, to now kind of coming back to the sport. Do you feel like you embrace your position as a cricket fan a lot more?
Yeah, I think so. And I also feel like it helps to like get older.
Yes,
100%. It helps to get older. It helps to like, to sort of recognize the ways in which you also kind of internalize certain like gender stereotypes and like misogynist narratives, and you're able to like identify where they're coming from the outside. You're able to identify them internally as well. And I think now I feel like when I speak about cricket, I know I started with a disclaimer. I still felt like I needed to start with a disclaimer, but I feel like the way in which the sport is understood and talked about, I found myself asking, why can't I say something? Why can't I have an opinion? And I haven't played the game, but I'm interested in the socio-cultural dynamics around it. I'm interested in its historical significance. I am a media analyst. And like you said, they are media events. Like they are a case study and understanding like the evolution of media technology in India, right? Like starting from radio to like satellite TV to now like smartphone streaming. So there's a lot of different entry points into cricket. And my mind, as it broadened as in a personal human way, it's also broadened in terms of my understanding of how to talk about cricket.
Women in male-dominated fields. I love it. But I have a lot of friends, a lot of family members who are obviously very, very into cricket and things like that. But I feel like you speak about the sport with a kind of interest and that I kind of see you as an authority on it, like at least in my life. So I love to hear about what you have to say. So given that, and given that there may be other people who are like me, kind of ignorant of the sport, listening to this podcast episode, I was thinking it would be interesting if you could chart a little like history of the sport in general. But what I'm most curious to know is, as you think about the history of cricket, what stood out to you the most, when you were like sort of maybe doing your own research or thinking about like some of the pivotal moments in the sport?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. Again, like I can get into some of the historical things, some historical facts about the game, but I feel like I have a personal relationship to like the modern iteration of the sport. So I feel like my natural biases will like lead me to like focus more on that. And that will also help us understand where we stand today vis-a-vis cricket. But like, if we had to like create a snapshot of what this history is, I think that first and foremost, cricket is a colonial sport, right? Like that's how it begins. So I would say that the history of this sport is a story of, this process of from colonization to decolonization, and then modernization, and then finally globalization, right? So going back to like the first thing that I said about like this colonization, decolonization, like dichotomy that was happening. So the first introduction of cricket is in colonial India. And I think the first game of cricket was played in the 1790s. And at that time, it was kind of played by the colonialists, the colonial powers, the, people in the army, and even like, people working in more like civil service positions. And it was because they were feeling homesick, right? And the birth of cricket in India was also the birth of another like colonial relic that has stuck around in Indian society, which is the country club, the social club, because that's where it was played.
PCI. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, all the clubs, all the gymkhanas, they all start with cricket.
Yeah.
Interesting fact about the word gymkhana, it actually comes from gend khana. Gend as in where the ball is kept. Gend means ball, and it was sort of adopted by the British, and they ended up calling it a gymkhana.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it got like a birthplace in England, spreads to the colonies, and the first international test match, right? Not played by like an English county or like like an army team or something like that, or a club team, was played in 1877. So that is the beginning of international cricket, international test cricket, and that was between England and Australia. So that's how it begins. India becomes a test playing nation in 1932. Before that was like this, just a second.
The beeping and booping don't stop.
But yeah, England becomes a test playing nation in 1932. Before that, there's like this like not scuffle, but like a sustained like movement of resistance among like Indians, or as they were referred to, the natives, who wanted to play cricket, right? Who wanted to be recognized as cricketers as well. Yeah. So India becomes a test playing nation in 1932. So this is like the beginnings of cricket. And I think like even women's cricket starts pretty early. Like you have like Indian women's teams playing as far back as the 1930s. So a lot of this is happening during movements of like anti-colonial resistance, what then becomes the independence movement. So a lot of that is happening simultaneously. But if we come to like modern cricket, which is defined by the limited overs era. So test cricket does not have a limit to the number of overs that can be bowled in one innings. An innings is like a segment of the game, right? So in test cricket, if you're in the first innings, there's no cap. Like it's not like you have to bowl 80 overs and then you're done, right? You can bowl 100 overs. You can bowl 120 overs. You can bowl as many overs as you would like to bowl, as long as the batting side is not out, right? So basically, it introduces this element of if you're the bowling side or the batting, if you're the batting side and you're just not getting out, like you've been batting for 90 overs and you're like 500 runs for like 8, you can declare, right? So it's like the players kind of decide how many overs they want to bat for. And limited overs says that no, you cannot keep batting and bowling for 5 days across 4 innings. How about we put a cap? We say that you bat and bowl just 50 overs and a game is completed in 1 day. So that's how one-day internationals come up. And then you have like an even more contracted version of this, which is T20s. And the whole idea behind this is that you want people to be interested.
Right. Yeah.
You want people to be interested. They don't have that much time to take out to watch 5 days. And secondly, you want results. You want matches with results. Not all test matches have results, but most one-day internationals and T20s will end in a win or a loss, and very few in a draw or a tie, right? None in a draw, but very few in a tie.
Yeah.
So you want results. You want to know who's the winner, who's the loser, right?
Right.
So the 50-over format, the first 50-over game is played in 1971. And in 1975, because you have limited overs, you can have a World Cup, a global tournament. So the first World Cup happens in 1975, and that creates a different kind of competition. Because before that, you only had like tours, bilateral tours. So it's like the India tour of West Indies. They would go and just like live in West Indies for 3 months and like play 5 test matches and 5 or 6 test matches. And that now changes. You can have a tournament where one match gets over in a day.
Yeah.
The T20 era begins in 2005. That was the first ever T20 international match that was held. And I think like a turning point really was the first T20 International World Cup, which was in 2007, famously won by India. The final was India versus Pakistan. India wins. it's also a famous victory because all the senior players like Sachin, Dravid, Tendulkar, they opted out. And it was instead led by one Mahendra Singh Dhoni, who was leading a fairly inexperienced sort of ragtag Indian team, and we won anyway. And that's very important because I think, as you told me, like what sticks out to me is just how pivotal and completely disruptive the IPL has been, right? Because if we did not win 2007, the IPL would not happen in 2008. And the IPL really sets the stage for India becoming the kind of behemoths that they are today, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said in the beginning, that there is this story of like colonization, decolonization. Now this limited overs era from like starting in the 70s and reaching this turning point in the early 2000s with T20 cricket is the modernization of the game. So I think that like cricket has always had this sort of like existential crisis that people aren't interested. We need to like inspire interest in cricket. How do we do it, right? One of the ways in which to do it is to make it shorter. Another way to do it is to think about the style of play. Like Test cricket, like I said when we were talking about baseball, that it's very slow paced. You're not really like, you can go to sleep. You know what I mean? For passages. And that I used to do that. I used to go to sleep during afternoon sessions. And if you see even in like live telecasts of test matches, people are sleeping on the ground. So that's not a very exciting game. So they needed to make it more exciting. And one way to do that was not just limited overs, but like a more exciting style of play, like more boundaries, more runs, more sixes, more everything, right? And this is also, cricket is a game of bat and ball, but cricket starts becoming increasingly a game of the bat, right?
Yeah.
So this is the modernization of the game that happens. And lastly, another way to contend with this like existential crisis of cricket is to globalize the game, right? So for almost all of cricket's history, till today, I would say, cricket has existed in like this closed ecosystem, like very insular. It's like, it's England, former colonies. And sometimes it's now increasingly so you'll have what they call the associate nations. So that's like Afghanistan and Nepal and the Netherlands, right? Who are entering from the outside into this closed off ecosystem.
Yeah.
But that basically means that the sport was never really like a world sport or global in nature, right? And I think that a very pivotal moment is coming up. It's not yet happened, and that's going to be the 2028 Olympics. So
yes.
I think that's going to be a huge turning point because that will be the biggest stage that cricket has ever occupied.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to expect, right? Like, so I think that there is a real understanding in the global cricketing like fraternity and governing bodies, the ICC, that you need to, for the survival of the game, like modernize, update yourself, and also be on a much bigger stage.
Yeah.
So I think like this is the next big pivot that cricket is going to be making. It's been experimenting with format. There's like a lot more prominence given to women's cricket, right?
Yes.
Which has in the last, I would say, decade come up in a way that it never had before, even though women were always playing cricket, right? And I think something that we need to also acknowledge in cricket's modernization is it making active efforts to be more inclusive, right? Yeah. I think something that is very interesting to me is the way in which the language of cricket has changed a little bit. So if you notice, if you have caught this while watching recent cricket matches, we no longer use the word, commentators no longer use the word batsman anymore, right? That's because in 2021, the official laws of cricket, which is like a rules and regulation like document, was amended to change the use of the word batsman to make it batter instead, because it's more gender neutral. The Cricket World Cup is no longer just the Cricket World Cup, it's the Men's Cricket World Cup and the Women's Cricket World Cup. So there are a lot of changes that have happened within cricket to be more inclusive of women's cricket as well. And I think without some of these steps to like be more inclusive of women, to globalize a lot more, cricket was always risking becoming obsolete, right?
Yeah.
So this is the history of cricket, I would say, in a snapshot.
Yeah. The thing I'm curious about, like, I mean, of course, like the change in formats and sort of like resisting becoming obsolete, like a big part of that is cultivating or continuing to cultivate new audiences, right? Like new viewership. Obviously, India is a big country. We have many, many people, and we'll get into the sort of spectatorship of the sport in India specifically. But what do you feel about fandom towards cricket in other countries? Because it's not the same as India for sure. Like cricket is a leading sport in India.
Yeah.
And fandom for other sports, in fact, is spotty. But like I would say it's the complete opposite in its home country of like England and stuff like that, where like football is significantly larger. I do think that even women's cricket, the fact that it's getting more funding is amazing. Maybe it'll bring more or like newer audiences into the fold. Maybe more women will watch the sport. I don't know if that's even a consideration or a thought that has gone into this. But I'm also curious if to keep cricket alive, it's important equally for at least like the other cricketing bodies, like from Australia or England or wherever else, to cultivate audiences in their home countries. And do you think that they're doing enough?
So the big three of international cricket are India, England, and Australia currently, right? And I think India has always been like a part of this club, but it is right now, as of today, March 15th, 2026, the dominant presence in world cricket. But the thing that English cricket and Australian cricket have done is that they have sort of focused more on the creating a pipeline, a sustained pipeline of cricketers, so that making sure the infrastructure is in place, making sure that all the youth leagues are in place, making sure that if somebody retires, there's always more cricketers to come up and take their space. I think these two countries do take a lot of they take some pains to make sure that cricket stays in the public consciousness. Mostly England. I think the England and Wales Cricket Board, ECB, the equivalent of the BCCI in England, they are making a lot of consistent efforts. So I think one thing that this was obviously like not just an English decision. This is an ICC tournament, which is the World Test Championship, right? Like how do you keep Test cricket alive? Limited overs cricket is really has really taken off, but how do you keep Test cricket alive? So they decided we need like something resembling a tournament for Test cricket as well. How do you do that? They're 5-day games. You can't have a knockout style tournament. So they have what they're calling the World Test Championship, which began in 2019. So essentially what they do is you take 2-year segments, all test playing nations. I think there are around 11 or 12, not more than 12, test playing nations who basically play tours of each other, home and away, over that 2-year period, and they win points based on that. And based on that point system, the top 2 teams then play a final. And that final has so far in 2021, 2023, and 2025 all happened at Lord's, which is the home of cricket in England, in London. So, and something that English cricket commentators like to say is that all of these matches have been neutral. Because the first match was India versus New Zealand. New Zealand won that. Second was India versus Australia. Australia won that. And the third was Australia versus South Africa.
Yeah.
So they do claim that there is like sustained interest in cricket in England and in Australia, but it just pales in comparison to the kind of fan following that you have for football in England and rugby in Australia. And that's got to do with the fact that those sports in these countries did not get democratized the way that it did in India, right? Like, so football began as almost an exclusively like working class sport. You didn't need that much equipment to play it.
Yeah.
And there were just that many more teams, right, in England playing football, and club football became incredibly popular.
Yeah.
So I think there is sustained interest in England for cricket, but it's just never going to match up
Yeah.
to football. It just isn't. And the same for cricket in Australia. I think where there is an opportunity and what is happening is to include more countries in T20 tournaments. I think that's a big way to make sure that cricket is being played outside of these like test countries
Yeah.
and former colonial nations, right?
Yeah.
It's a big deal that Afghanistan has risen in prominence,
Yeah.
right? It's what you really want as a cricket fan is for like, I don't know, Netherlands to win,
Yeah.
for Nepal to win. Nepal almost beat England in the T20 World Cup that just ended.
Yeah.
So these are like, if something like that happens, it's amazing. And one of the ways, and I think everybody's very aware of this, that you need to reach new countries,
Yeah.
because maybe you've reached like some kind of saturation point in the existing countries. One way in which that may happen is the Olympics. I think one fun fact about the Olympics is that the last time cricket was played at the Olympics was in 1900.
Yeah.
Can you guess how many teams played cricket at the Olympics?
5 or 6 maybe?
Two.
No way.
Two
Is it-
teams played cricket.
England and
England and France.
France. Wow.
And England won. And then they tried to play cricket again in the 1904 Olympics. They were denied.
Wow. So basically
were-
they just didn't have any teams.
They didn't have enough people playing.
Oh my
And-
God.
The first time that they're going to play in the Olympics since then is 2028.
Mm.
So it's been like a real push by the ICC to get enough countries to play cricket
Yeah.
to be eligible to play it at the Olympics.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's happening in LA, right? The 2028 Olympics. They say that they really like credit Virat Kohli for increasing the popularity of the sport and for more people in the US to be interested. So I think that they've been playing a long game in terms of thinking about like making cricket salient on a world stage. And
Yeah.
I think as a cricket fan, I have no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? What's going to happen? Like the way in which like the 2024 summer and 2026 winter Olympics like became like social media like events where people were constantly tweeting about things
Yeah.
and posting reels on Instagram. Like cricket has the opportunity to enter that arena. So I'm interested to see what happens.
I'm really curious to see how the format is adapted for the Olympics and stuff. Also, like if there's any changes that will be made, and just in terms of its reception as well. So I am curious about that. Yeah, I mean, in countries like England and Australia, the barrier to entry to cricket is also so high, right? Like it is a elite sport still there. And what's really interesting about like India and other colonial countries is that it's completely mass. It's like it's played, gully cricket is played in everywhere all the time, and it's like you don't play football as much with your friends as you play cricket. Like it's a if you are a young boy or a girl, you are playing cricket in school, in your society, wherever. And that brings me to my next question, which I think is like an interesting thing to even think about, which is what makes like India's relationship to cricket unique, right?
Yeah.
Obviously it's a post-colonial dream in many ways, right? Like it's and there's something to that. There's something to the fact that it's such a mass sport in colonial countries. Maybe we saw ourselves as the underdogs, and it was like sort of kind of in just a way to prove ourselves in some sense, right?
Yeah.
It was like it's almost as if it was important to us to be good at cricket.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder what you think makes cricket unique in India.
Yeah, yeah. And you had also asked, I think we were chatting like what makes cricket different from like football and hockey, right?
Yeah.
To other sports that are also popular over here. So, there is a book by Ram Guha called A Corner of a Foreign Field,
Yeah.
in which he writes about like the history of cricket and the history of modern India, like side by side. And in that, he has said it is easier to document and celebrate the Indian love for cricket than to analyze or explain it. And I mean, he tries to do it, and I'm going to try and do it right now as well. But I think to ask ourselves, like what you just said right now, like what is our relationship with cricket and why is it unique for this sport as opposed to others? And you're absolutely right. Like Indian cricket, when it first began, was a symbol of colonial resistance,
Yeah.
right? And it starts from the very first cricketers who were playing competitive cricket, who were the Parsis in Bombay. They had to fight for a space to play
Yeah.
because I guess the Maidan, what is today, like I think called, is it the Oval
Azad,
Maidan?
Oval Maidan. Yes. Correct.
Yeah. I think that Maidan basically there was a part of it that was reserved for like the Bombay Gymkhana, the British, to
Yeah.
play their cricket, and a part of it was basically given to the Parsis, right? And then the Parsis bit of the Maidan started being given away to the British polo players. And people playing polo over there ended up like completely destroying
Yeah.
the field and the pitch.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to play like serious competitive cricket if you don't have a pitch, right? So there was like a fight over that space, like where they were writing like petition after petition to the governor of Bombay presidency back then, like, can we be allowed to play? We want to play, right?
Yeah.
So that battle for space kind of makes it different from how like hockey and football began in India,
Yeah.
right? They came to India in the same way.
Yeah.
All of them were introduced by the British. All
Yeah.
of them had like clubs form around them. They were being played by like the military regiments over there. But cricket had this like flavor of resistance, and it started mirroring what was the early like colonial struggle, right?
Mhm.
And I think that it was being played by elites across groups, across the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Parsis
Yeah.
back then. That was very much the colonial movement at that time period. We're talking about like the 1850s, 60s, 70s. That's when people are starting to make their own team. So like the Parsis have their own Gymkhana by the end of the 19th century. The Hindus have their own, and the Muslims have their own. So that's what the early colonial struggle looked like as well. So it was really mirroring that. And I think what you said is true, which is that winning a match against the British in the Bombay Gymkhana team meant a lot,
Yeah.
right? I think the first time we won against England was like in 1952 or so, and that was in India. That meant a lot as
Yeah.
well. And I think what's also important about cricket, this is my take on matters, which is the arc a sport takes is important,
Yeah.
right? If you think about hockey, we were playing hockey in the Olympics as early as 1928. And we won gold medals in 3 consecutive Olympics in 1928, 1932, and 1936.
Yeah.
And we were unbeaten for like 30 matches. So you're starting off really strong, right? And that dominance kind of continues for a certain period of time, and then you kind of fall off, right? When it comes to football, we have never exceeded on the world stage. We have never like gotten that, like we've barely won games, right? But in cricket, like you said, there is this underdog story in which you are an underdog, but you are still able to win some key contests. So you're winning just enough for sustained interest,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's incredibly important that they won the 1983 World Cup, because this is around the time that hockey has gone into decline.
Yeah.
And this is also, they had an outside chance. They won against all odds. They won
Yeah.
against the West Indies, who were like an absolutely lethal team at that time. No one expected them to win. And
Yeah.
the fact that they won was very, very important. So they
Yeah.
won at the right time. And the next World Cup that was held in India and Pakistan, the 1987 World Cup. And that was the first World Cup that was held outside of England. Right?
Yeah.
So I feel like cricket has this like unique spot because of this arc that it takes, where it began, how it began. And I also think it matters because the stage on which cricket was played is different from the other sports. Hockey and football were already being played at the global stage. Football World Cups and Olympics. When it comes to cricket, like I said, there's a closed ecosystem. You're only playing teams in bilateral series for the most part, right? So it's you against this other person. There's way more scope for you to compete on an equal footing. There are far fewer teams playing.
Yeah.
So you're able to then there is an ascendancy that becomes possible in cricket.
Yeah.
So I think that matters a lot as well, because if you're talking about who's the best team in the world in cricket and you say it's India, you're actually only talking about like 15 other countries.
Yeah.
Right? Like as opposed to being the best football team in the world,
Yeah.
like that's a different, like that's a tall order. That's something else altogether.
Yeah.
And I think the final thing, so we spoke about like the history of the sport. I think there are two other dimensions over here is the game itself,
Yeah.
I think, which is very slow and leisurely.
Yeah.
It takes up 3 to 6 hours of your day.
Yeah.
And I think it fits into the rhythms of everyday life over here in a way that those other two sports do not, like hockey and football, right? I think it kind of fulfills a desire, at least within me, for like passing time, like literal time pass, right? Why did you asked me, I fell in love with this sport. That's because I had so much time on my hands and I wanted to know how to spend that time. And, at the beginning of the day, if you have like 6 hours of, cricket to go, you're like, wow, I'm sorted. I have 6 hours to spend. And this is an interesting point that Ram Guha actually makes, which is that Indians like chatting and analyzing and inserting themselves into a game. So if you're watching a game of football, for 90 minutes, you have to pay like rapt attention.
That's true. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But when you're watching cricket, in between overs, you're like, hey, I think he should be bowling that kind of delivery.
Yeah.
You're strategizing. So
No, I remember like even test matches being like they're just on in the background all the time. We would have had guests over. The guests have come. We've served them lunch. We've chatted a little bit about like what the score looks like, and then we go back into talking about other things. And then you return to the game later, and it's a fact of life. Like it's almost as it just is background viewing as well. But that's actually very interesting.
Yeah,
because
so
I have wondered this, that like at the same time, it's a very complex game, man. Like I said, the barrier to entry is very, very high. There are like endless rules and regulations and like, I don't know.
Mathematical equations.
Yeah. like I still, if you still ask me like what exactly an LBW is, I'm like, I don't really know. But like, and also the thing is, what it takes for a player to get out, or like, even if there is a rule, within the rule also, there are like many possibilities. Like it could be this or it could be that, which could like make the out happen or not. Like it's just
umpire's call.
Umpire's call, the third umpire, and all of these other things, which makes it such a complex game. And the fact that it's still something that people watch and follow is amazing to me.
Yeah. It's when you're watching, like you're not just watching, right? You're talking to people at the same time. You're like, I think they should be doing this. Like I said, when I was watching, I wasn't just watching the game, I was listening to the commentary, right? And I think that's very important, because if I watch like football matches, I don't have the mind space
to pay attention.
To even recognize what strategy is being involved here.
Yeah.
So commentary for football matches is descriptions of what is happening on the screen. Commentary in cricket matches is descriptions of what's happening, but also did you know that in 1955 there was one match where a similar like situation happened between the same two teams? You know, they like dig into like archival records, and it's all about like, you know, there is like a section of the Cricinfo website called Stats Guru where you can like pick up stats. And yeah, I think it allows for a lot of that, which I think Indians really take to.
Yeah.
And I think the last reason why it is as popular as it is, and it like football and hockey cannot compete, is like capital C, capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, of course. Yeah.
No, it is an advertiser and sponsor's dream.
Yeah.
Okay. 6 hours of a day, every 5 minutes, an ad break. Are you kidding me?
That's true.
You can't do that in any other sport.
Yeah.
You have to make do with, put my logo on your jersey, put my logo on the ground, and be happy with that. And no one complains about ads during a cricket match. We expect them, right?
We enjoy them. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think all of like it's like this like perfect recipe.
Yeah, the fact that like even in the US, like the only thing that can really compare is like the Super Bowl, and then you have like the ad spots. But that's also like a time cap thing. It's not like an ongoing thing through the course of the tournament. Whereas in cricket, and you know, like some of the ads that I feel like have actually like been embedded in my memory are the ones that were playing all the time when the cricket match was on all the time in the background.
Yeah.
Never otherwise, you know. So, okay, interesting. So, you know, I was also doing some level of thinking as a sort of like casual viewer of cricket, right? Like, and to me, like the observation that I've always made about like cricket and its relationship to Indians is that I feel like that the history of cricket and cricket's evolution as a sport in many ways mirrors the history of India itself. And like you can't deny obviously that India is a key player in cricket as a sport, continues to be, and has helped shape that evolution. And I'll tell you what I mean, right? So we spoke about post 1947, that sort of period up until the 90s, where cricket is a post-colonial dream. Like we are the underdogs, and winning a game of cricket is like winning something against the British, right? Like it sort of is that feeling. It's the same feeling. It's in the same vein. Post 1991, India liberalizes, and there is what you also see slowly is a commercialization of cricket, which we've also discussed. The growth of the BCCI, and the BCCI also is pivotal in kind of like figuring out how to nationalize cricket and to commercialize it. It introduces like cable ads, and also what like also happens is like nationalism and cricket become increasingly intertwined. And it's within this era that we also see the rise of IPL, right? Like made for TV cricket. I feel like IPL, you know, someone many years ago described it as like made for TV cricket, like also someone who's like a naysayer. And I'm curious to know if you are like you like IPL or don't like it, or you have you're like, either or. But now we've entered another interesting journey in cricket, which is like post 2014. New era of cricket and nationalism sort of interplaying, right? Like where it's like you see that there are like limited engagements with the Pakistan team. Basically any like complete rejection of like cross-border magnanimity. Jay Shah is in power. That's a whole other dynamic. And we have like true dominance in the ICC. And what we're seeing as like next steps, like I was reading about this also, is that with the IPL, a lot of the IPL teams have started investing in like franchisee teams abroad. So like a KKR will have like two franchisee teams that they have invested
like
in.
5 Mumbai Indians, you know.
And exactly. And also like the like India is playing now an increasingly pivotal role in the growth of the game abroad. And it also mimics like Indian commerce and Indian money capital going abroad as well. Like, so it's interesting. Like when I look at it from this way, obviously there's a lot of the nitty-gritties of the game and its evolution that I'm not privy to or I haven't really paid attention to. But like Do you think that this analysis is valid?
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about it for a long time. Like ever since you posed this question to me, I've been thinking about it. And, to start off, I don't think it's a coincidence
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
one of the most preeminent like chroniclers of modern Indian history also happens to be like a celebrated cricket writer. Like there's a reason why Ram Guha wrote that book, right?
Love you, Ram. Sorry.
Yeah. Like so there's definitely like truth to it. The only like I guess nuance I'll add to this is that I think cricket offers a lens through which to understand modern Indian history, post-independence history. But I don't think it's a parallel process or a perfect microcosm.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I do think what you said, like there are some parallels that you can find. Like, obviously when we're talking about the anti-colonial movement, there's a clear parallel over there. Also, like right after independence, like domestic cricket in India sort of like began in like the 1950s with the creation of state teams.
Yeah.
And that kind of followed the linguistic reorganization of states in independent India, which also happened in the 50s. And like you said, post-liberalization, the 1996 World Cup was also held in India. And there was like a big like battle between like Coke and Pepsi of who's going to be the lead sponsor of that World Cup. Coke won, but then Pepsi famously got a lot of like Indian cricketers to be its brand ambassadors. So like
I say this is happening with ChatGPT and Gemini now?
Yeah, I mean,
where like OpenAI is like the jersey sponsor and Gemini is like sponsoring the venues or whatever.
Can you stop pointing that at my head? I'm telling them. Should be live.
The editor interrupts this broadcast to bring you a message from our AI chatbots.
OpenAI is the sponsor for the Women's Premier League, and Gemini is the sponsor for the Men's T20 World Cup.
And I mean,
yeah,
this is the age that
exactly.
we're in. First it was Coke and Pepsi, now it's fucking AI platforms. But
processed foods and a processed intelligence, right? Yeah. So you do see some parallels, but I think there's a crucial contradiction which also explains some of this like sustained popularity. And I feel like I've been saying this since my blogging days. Okay. And now I feel it more strongly. I've always thought that cricket is like a vehicle for India to kind of realize its global superpower dreams.
Yeah.
Because it's not really able to do it in terms of economics, geopolitics, and international relations. But the fact that we succeed and have succeeded in cricket despite like our developmental challenges, that is what I think is that final piece of the puzzle. Like, what is it about cricket that is unique to India, but also kind of captures where we are in this moment in time, is the kind of national pride it inspires. Right?
Yeah.
There's no other arena in which India dominates the way it does in world cricket. To your point about where we are today, I think that we are at a moment in time where our dominance in cricket has far outpaced any other kind of dominance. Like, it's not happening in parallel, right?
Yeah.
There is no doubt that we are the most powerful cricketing nation with the most powerful cricketing body. Most money, most power, most everything. We're bullies, right?
Yeah.
And we have taken that power and that money and we've been able to invest in robust infrastructure to sustain this cricketing dominance. And you can kind of see it in the recently concluded like Cricket World Cup, right? A lot of like former cricketers, English cricketers, Michael Vaughan, he was the former English captain. He says that the best team in the world, best T20 team in the world is India, and the second best T20 team in the world is India A, India's second team. So no other country is even close to competing. And that's because this robust infrastructure has been created. People are the BCCI and the ICC, they're all taking like cricket a lot more seriously and with this long-term vision of how are we thinking about domestic cricket? How are we thinking about like developing new players, coaching, youth teams, all of those things, right? But at the same time, we, in terms of human development, in terms of all these other indicators of like poverty levels, education, women's rights, all of those other things, we're still fighting to be that developed nation, right? Like that's where, Vikasit Bharat 2047, that dream comes from, right? That
Yeah.
idea of like graduating into like a high income developed country. That's still 22 years away. Like the government is implicitly acknowledging this. Cricket's already there. It's as developed as it can get.
Yeah.
So I do think that that contradiction is very important, which is where you understand India and you understand where it is, but it's not following the same track.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, because it was very interesting to see the responses, at least on Twitter and in general, about the T20 World Cup win.
Mm,
And I have a list of a few,
Right.
but I think the general sort of trend was, I'm really ashamed of what BCCI is doing to the sport.
mm,
And it's effectively like, I mean, I'll quickly read through a few of the tweets that I like bookmarked, which I thought were very interesting.
yeah.
One is that T20 World Cup no longer has any integrity. India is to blame. Of course, there were people that were very much celebrating this win,
Yeah.
and were happy about it. So maybe, I don't know if this is just my side of Twitter.
Yeah.
But no integrity, a lot of condemnation of Jay Shah and just generally what he has done.
Mm.
And they're
What
calling
has
it
he
a
done, according to them?
calculated mutilation of a sport, dictating and doctoring pitches to grotesquely favor their 11.
Yeah.
Congratulations, MFs. You have killed the game. Plug those trophies into Jay Shah's ... and celebrate the murder of this sport. Some people are saying cricket doesn't interest me anymore. India keeps winning and it makes the game insanely boring. So I've switched to
Mm.
F1. Now I'm a Ferrari fan and love suffering.
Yeah.
And then somebody else said, as an Indian, I feel that we have added one more trophy to our list, but honestly, this trophy is not giving me even 1% of the satisfaction and happiness that previous World Cups or CTs gave me.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, basically the feeling is that the pitches were rigged, umpiring was rigged, DRS was rigged, World Cup was rigged. And this tournament win means nothing. But this is just my
Yeah. What
side
you're
of the
seeing.
internet.
Yeah. No, that's so I'll tell you what. So from the perspective of like, is this the death of cricket? Like people have been saying this since
For a while.
2008, right?
Yeah.
They've been ever since the IPL came to the scene. But I do think that cricket has adapted, has adjusted. I'm not a big fan of how much the format favors batsmen, right?
Yeah.
Or how much like spectators think a good match is a high scoring match,
Yeah.
as opposed to a match with like lots of wickets, right?
Yeah.
Low scoring matches are almost always thought to be like, that was not fun. There weren't
Yeah.
enough boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of that, but I do think that like cricket is very adaptable. And you'll hear a lot of people say this, that, when this was the semi-final of this Cricket World Cup, England versus India, in which England got very close to winning, right? Like they fell short by 6 or 7 runs. And they said that in a match where 500 runs were scored, the defining factor that differentiated both teams was a bowler, and that's Jasprit Bumrah. So, I mean, it's a reductive take. They're
Yeah.
not entirely wrong. And when it comes to like this idea of like rigging pitches or whatever, like that's, for people who are like watchers of the game beyond like the World Cup or beyond like matches in India, you just know that there is something known as a home advantage.
Yeah.
And-
Of course.
And
Exactly.
and like cricket, unlike a lot of other sports, is like something that depends a lot on the conditions. When they talk about conditions, they're talking about literally the soil and the climate and the air and the wind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how all of that comes together to create that 22-yard wicket.
Yeah.
And in South Africa and Australia, they're what they call fast pitches. That is pitches suited to fast bowling because they're hard and they have grass on them, which allow for a lot of bounce and pace. In England, because you have like gloomy, like humid weather, it allows for the ball to move through the air and swing one way or the other. These are the strengths of these different countries and settings. In
Yeah.
India, our pitches are like traditionally they have been like what they call a turning pitch, which is a pitch which allows the ball to turn.
Yeah.
And what has happened in this tournament is that they want to create pitches that you can score lots of runs on. And that's because that's the strength of the Indian team, the batting and the high run scoring. And they think that if they get a lot of runs, they're going to be able to defend it because they have good enough bowlers to do that. So, I mean, it's a bit reactionary, I would say.
And I will also say that it maybe it takes a little bit more issue with the larger sort of larger context of how cricket is playing out rather than whether the integrity of the game is fully lost. And what I mean to say with that is that it's apparent, like, I mean, that Jay Shah does nothing to hide his loyalties, right? He's the president of the ICC. There was a video that came out of the Indian cricket team winning, and it's like 40 shots of just Jay Shah. So there's that. There's the fact that he's the home minister's son, like those sort of like elements which come into the game, and cricket has always been political. It's now more so than ever before.
I used to think that, but then I in preparing for this episode learned about how cricket was instrumentalized by like Indira Gandhi, during like the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
And that's like in the sense it's always been instrumentalized because cricket is like one of those things that is like truly pan-Indian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's one of the only things, like if you think about film industries, if you think about food, there's like immense diversity. But if you had to say what is one thing that for the most part, north, south, east, west, you're going to find people are interested and invested in, it is cricket. And, a journalist writing in like the 70s or the 80s wrote that cricket, Lata Mangeshkar and the transistor make India one nation. Right? So I do think that it's always been politicized. I think like Jay Shah exists in a lineage, that, but the fact that we have this much control over the ICC, I think I need to personally remind myself that Jay Shah is like the president of the ICC, not BCCI. Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I need to keep like reminding myself this.
Yeah.
Of course, there is like a politicization. The fact that, you always have like world leaders, India and Pakistan matches, you'll have like the leaders of both countries present at that match, no matter at what point of the tournament it is being played. Like it doesn't need to be like a final, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that it's always been politicized. I don't think the politics is what is threatening the game as much as I don't think the game is being threatened. One thing that I realized that I actually think that there is a lot more interest today. I think that there are active efforts made towards even making Test cricket relevant, right? Like, so now there's a new format that's coming up. It's called Test 20, which is combining elements of both Test matches and T20 crickets. Because you go 20 overs first innings one side, 20 overs first innings the second side, then 20 overs for second innings the first side, and then so on and so forth. And that's just going to open up new opportunities.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that you kind of asked me to think about is like predictions and the state of international cricket. I think like related to what we were just saying, right, is there's going to be a decline of certain elements, right, of the cricket that we've known. And I think there is a very obvious decline in one-day cricket that's going to happen. And you can tell that, you can just see, like if you see any tour, right, like what was a recent tour? Like I think if India is touring New Zealand, there will be 3 ODIs and 5 T20s. Right? So earlier it used to be the opposite. It used to be like 5 ODIs and like 2 or 3 T20s. Or equal, right? But now they're reducing the number of one day matches in like a tour.
Right.
So what they've realized is that Test cricket is important and essential for the history of the game, and we can still maintain. They would like to maintain interest for that. T20s are they if cricket was a social enterprise, T20 is the business arm of everything.
Yeah.
But like one days is where outside of a World Cup, people are not as interested in bilateral series. Like the World Cup is the only thing that makes people interested. So they're like, let's take elements of tests and elements of T20 and like create this new format altogether.
Yeah.
So there is going to be a decline of ODIs.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people online are also like lamenting some of these things, right? Like because ODI cricket is what made cricket as popular
Yeah.
as it is, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it feels also that people are reactionary now, but I think they've always been about cricket.
Oh, they always have.
They always have been. Yeah.
But I think, I'll tell you what, this thing about not being excited about India winning, I think this is one like conditional prediction that I have.
Yeah.
We have an unshakable dominance in tests and in T20s, but we have had a terrible time in test cricket so far in the last like 12 to 18 months. We have not won a test match in home conditions since early 2024 when we played England. Like we lost all the matches against New Zealand, all the matches against South Africa that have been played between November of last year and earlier late last year, November 2024 and then November, December 2025. So it's this, if cricket has been popular because we felt like we had something to fight against, like there was some friction, right? We needed to prove something. If we reach unshakable dominance in test cricket as well, I think the impossible might be set in motion, which is a decline in interest in cricket in India. Because I think, the final happened like a week ago.
Yeah.
And there was not as much fanfare at all, even though they won in India. This is very funny. Everybody has been talking about it, that, Ravi Shastri was commentating when they won and he didn't realize that the 10th wicket had fallen. And he didn't realize the match was over. He said, oh yeah, and now they're 9 down. Wait, no, sorry, we're 10 down,
Yeah.
Like that happened. So it's like, oh, even he wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need
anticlimactic. Yeah.
Any kind of fandom requires something to fight against.
Yeah. I mean, more than anything, maybe there will be a renegotiation of what cricket means and like what it stands for. So perhaps remains to be seen, I guess.
It remains to be seen. I think two other things are going to, one prediction for Indian cricket and another, we've already spoken about it. For Indian cricket, I do think that there's going to be a fast bowling culture in India that is going to come up. We're going to see a lot of like Jasprit Bumrah children, people trying to bowl fast just because of him.
Yeah. Jasprit Bumrah's children.
Yeah. Like there's going to be a decline in spin bowling, which means that Indian cricket's going to look a bit different.
Yeah.
And also, like, I think the big turning point is going to be like this biggest global stage. Like maybe we'll have something new to fight for. Like the Olympic gold is one thing. If more countries, like, I don't know, if China decides I want to play cricket seriously, they can like overnight like put all the
that would be the next big challenge.
They'd like in 20 years be like, this unbeatable team, who knows?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They'll mobilize their masses also like this,
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen. But like, yeah, I think cricket, like we're seeing like the last the cricket that we recognize, I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be like massively transformative years. So let's see what happens.
Are you open to you sound like you're open to transformation.
I think that's the only way in which this sport has survived. It has had to like adapt.
Reinvent itself.
It has to reinvent it. And it has. And I think I appreciate that about the game. I think like there were these like middle periods where I felt similarly to these commenters and tweeters, right? That you've killed the game. But I think, the tactics have evolved in response. Bowling, like variation has evolved in response. I think bowlers are the most adaptable. Like I think they are like underappreciated. I think like I'm so happy that a bowler is thought to be like the superstar right now. And so I think so I believe that, but I think like just seeing how like different facets of the game are appearing because of this innovation, like it's exciting to see that.
Yeah. Okay. So we're now entering an interesting, fun segment of this episode. But before I get into the real fun segment, I actually wanted to ask you a fun question. For as long as there has been cricket, there have been cricketing moments, right?
Yeah.
It's like I said, for the casual viewer, it's a media event. And there are so many so many moments that are like, we spoke about advertising, but even on the field, outside of the field, which are just like entrenched in your memory. Like, what are your top 3 favorite cricketing moments of all time?
Yeah. Yes, I had to think a lot for this question. And I did, like for 2 of these moments, I wanted to identify an iconic moment and then think about the origin story that made that possible. So my favorite moment is actually that origin story moment.
Okay.
And then, but like it's like the moment behind the iconic moment.
Okay.
And I'll explain the domino effect.
Okay, cool.
So the iconic moment is what everybody knows. So the first one is the 2011 World Cup. Obviously, the final, you can just immediately imagine like Dhoni kind of like hitting that ball for a 6 and then like, you know, his bat arm falling a bit and him just staring into space. Everyone can imagine that. And, you know, Ravi Shastri's voice behind that.
Yeah.
The origin story behind this moment, October 31st, 2005, Dhoni's 183 against Sri Lanka, unbeaten. It announces his arrival into Indian cricket. He had debuted for India in 2004, and I don't think he had a great start. But when he played this match, this innings, 183, you kind of saw his caliber, his approach towards the game, his helicopter shots, all of that. And I think that's important because I think Dhoni's been a very like pivotal player for the position that Indian cricket is in. And the reason why that, I think the reason why that is because he was then appointed captain in 2007 for the T20 side. Like I said, senior players stepped down. Rahul Dravid is the ODI and Test captain at this point in time.
Yeah.
He is then soon appointed full-time captain after this. Then you have the launch of the IPL in 2008, which could not have happened if Dhoni's team did not win in 2007.
Yeah.
Under him and Gary Kirsten, they win the World Cup. They reach number 1 Test team status, although that was very short-lived. And that ultimately like culminates in this moment. So I think Dhoni's 183 against Sri Lanka 2005 is like the butterfly effect starts over there. So that's one iconic moment. Now the second iconic moment is the 2019 World Cup final between England and New Zealand. And it is hands down the best one-day international ever played. Some people will say, actually, you know what, it's the 437 match between Australia and South Africa, but it is this match. For people who do not know, essentially, this match ends in the scores tied at the end of the second innings. Scores are level.
Yeah.
So then they get into a super over. And then eventually what happens in the super over, it's very controversial, and I'm still like sore about it. 2 things happen. One is Ben Stokes hits a ball for a 2. New Zealand, I think that was Martin Guptill, he picks up the ball and he throws it at the stumps to try and run out Ben Stokes, who's just taken his second run. Ben Stokes leaps into the air back into his crease. He reaches there on time, but the ball hits his bat and goes for a boundary. Okay. So it's counted as a 6. But anyway, the super over also ends in a tie. So now what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You have 2 ties. Are you going to do another super over? Eventually, what they decide to do is, this is where the cricketing laws are important. What do you do when like a World Cup final ends with the scores level and a super over, which is a tiebreaker, also ends with scores level? They decide on a technicality to give the World Cup to the team that scored more boundaries. boundary count. This is what pisses me off because it's like, why boundary count? Why not the number of wickets taken? And on that technicality, England wins the World Cup, right?
Oh my God.
It was, I cried when I watched this live. It was horrifying because I'm a New Zealand cricket fan. But okay, this is the iconic moment. The origin story for this moment is when New Zealand beats Australia in Australia in Test cricket for the first time since 1985 in 2011.
Yeah.
So New Zealand has always been thought to be like a lesser team.
Yeah.
They don't have as much money. They don't have as many people. They are like, you know, Australia's like lesser neighbor. And they haven't won very much at this point in time. In 2011, that's when I had started watching cricket. So imagine me, I'm like awake at like 3 or 4 in the morning watching this match in Hobart in Tasmania in Australia. New Zealand wins this match by 7 runs.
Yeah.
And this is the team that has players who become like internationally recognized as some of the best. It has Kane Williamson, Tim Southee, Trent Boult, Martin Guptill, Brendan McCullum himself, and Ross Taylor. And the domino effect from here is that they start winning quite a bit. So they win. I think one very shocking thing for me, just as I was learning about cricket, is that there is such a thing called subcontinental conditions, which is hot, dry, spinning conditions. It's very difficult for people who are not used to these, like the climate, right? Or the style of bowling to actually win in these conditions. So New Zealand win against Sri Lanka in 2011-12. And that kind of is a big deal. That's what people say about India as well. They did not win against Australia until Virat Kohli went there and won. It's easy to win in your own conditions. You need to win in away conditions. That's essentially a marker of success in cricket. Then they get to the World Cup final in 2015 where they lose to Australia. And then that brings them to the World Cup final in 2019, where they were not thought to be like this outside team that, you know, we're shocked that they've reached the World Cup final. So I think it begins with that win against Australia in 2011 by 7 runs. So that's my moment behind the moment.
If someone asked me this question, this would not be my answer. But these are super fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think New Zealand has done a lot. It has an impact on world cricket. So I've already spoken about like Brendan McCullum and Bazball, right?
Yeah.
Fun fact, which a lot of people know, but it's important, is that John Wright, he's like a former New Zealand player. He was also the coach of the Indian team in the early 2000s. He was head coach at Mumbai Indians in 2013. He is credited with discovering one Jasprit Bumrah.
Really?
Seeing him play for his state team, Gujarat. And he said, you should sign up to play for Mumbai Indians. He played against Sachin and Sachin's like, we got to get this guy. So he like a Kiwi is the reason why Jasprit Bumrah has made his way into our hearts.
Wow.
So I think New Zealand has like behind the scenes played a big role in world cricket.
Yeah. Also, I hated those ads. Did you see those like front page newspaper ads by Blinkit and stuff of like them slicing a kiwi before this match? Did you see those?
No, I haven't.
I thought they were in such poor taste. But anyway,
my third moment is.
Oh yes, of course, the third one is left.
So the third one is a bit different, and again, this is like completely speaking to my own experience and personal biases. I think the early IPL ads and songs, right, between 2008 and 2011, they come at the tail end of the post-liberalization ad revolution in India. And I'm referring to like the Kingfisher ads, because Kingfisher had sponsored a number of teams, not just RCB. And their slogan was divided by teams, united by Kingfisher.
Yeah.
And the ads were just all players in like Kingfisher sponsored teams who were singing the Kingfisher song, which is ooh la 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 leo, and that's it. Yeah. That's all it is. Pepsi had a campaign in I guess the early 10s called Change the Game.
Right.
And the whole idea was that they would take cricketers who were famous for a certain shot, and they were trying to show how these cricketers came up with these shots. or like their signature like moves, shots for batsmen, but like
Yeah.
also bowlers. So for example, Malinga, Slinger Malinga, who also had a big role to play in who Bumrah ends up becoming. But anyway, he has a slinging action, like his arm like goes in front of him diagonally.
Yeah.
So his version of the game is that he is inserted into like an everyday like Indian life setting, which is that there's a traffic policeman who is trying to manage like traffic at a busy crossing, and he's like, Malinga, I need your help. And then he tells him, if you want to help me, put your hand out, like, you know, perpendicularly, and to tell them to go, like swipe it in front of you in a diagonal action. And then you can see Malinga, who's like, oh wow, this is giving me an idea. And then he's like, all the players, they look intensely at like a bottle of Pepsi or a can of Pepsi, and they're like, I think this has awakened something in me, and I need to take this to the cricket field. And so they're saying that this is how they came up with these ideas. So they're like bringing together these two themes of like, number one, how is T20 changing the game? But also like these international stars are now in India's backyard and have to assimilate into our ways of being and playing cricket. You have to appeal to the Indian fan, basically.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I this is just the ads, but there were also all the old songs like from the first year where I think the IPL had to do something very difficult, because for the first time, you're asking Indians to support national and international stars
Players, yeah.
playing for locally rooted clubs and not national teams. So there was this like unity and diversity like messaging in all the songs, all the ads, like this whole like, oh yeah, you're divided by teams, but you're still like, this is in the Indian Premier League, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel like that kind of like that like flavor of patriotism just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's evolved quite a bit. So I think like I really enjoyed that era of
Is this
Indian
also
advertising.
the period where that Manu Ranjan Ka Baap ad came out?
So that ad comes in 2010, I think,
Right.
10 or 11. And I think that is around the time of like the Change the Game Kingfisher ads. But Kingfisher ad started from the beginning. But I think in that moment, it has been established that this is like the most entertaining 2-3 months of the year. So that's why you're able to say, I am Manoranjan
Manu
Kabab,
Ranjan Ka Baap. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
but if you look at like the first ever like music video for the Kolkata Knight Riders, the Kodbo Lodbo Jeetpore video, it's like you need to convince and persuade
People.
audiences to watch it. So there was a different flavor to that
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
once you've already established yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. But I really liked that Manoranjan Ka Baap ad because of the story that it weaves, and it's like rooted in that Karan Arjun story, or I think, and then it's basically this woman who she's like on the like search for the father of her children, and she's like, and then
And
the
her
whole
children
ad
are
is
called Manu and Ranjan.
yes, Manu and Ranjan, correct, and they're like, nahi hamara baap zarur aayega, and then people are like, kahan hai tumhara baap, and it's very like filmy and Bollywood. But yeah, fantastic ad. Miss that era.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for these 3 moments. They were very interesting and illuminating. We will now enter the last section of this interview, which is a rapid fire round. And as I had mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I took some help from our mutual friend, the one who must not be named, who helped me come up with these questions.
Oh my God.
So
are they quiz questions? Because I'm going to cheat and look up the answers online.
They are not quiz questions.
Okay.
This is rapid fire.
Okay.
So, and you have to answer quickly. Do not explain your answer. And it's literally just 1-word answers, okay?
Okay.
So it's a list of 9 questions.
Oh my God.
4 of which are the greatest, dash, and then you just have to answer the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh my God.
And the remaining 5 are this or that.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to go into the first 4 questions, which are the greatest dash, and then you have to answer very quickly. First thing that comes to your mind. As soon as you answer, we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. Greatest Indian batter.
Oh God. Okay.
You have to pick. You have to pick.
Rahul Dravid.
I knew it was going to be that. Shit. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a later question redundant, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Greatest cricket captain of all time.
Greatest cricket captain of all time. See, of all time is very hard for me
Okay. Since you started watching cricket.
since I started watching cricket. That's hard to say.
So our mutual friend, who must not be named, has given some leading answers in case you are not able to pick one, and then you just have to pick from that.
Okay.
So should I say them, or do you have an answer?
So, I mean, I'm thinking about okay, I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
Shane Warne for the Rajasthan Royals in the first season of the IPL.
Interesting answer. Okay.
Because, I mean, that was fantastic. No one expected them to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like a captain who steered them towards victory. And sure, we can talk about test captains, but the reason why I brought it up is because in the era that I have watched, I have seen great captaincy and bad captaincy from the same people, right? And I think that sustained captaincy, for an international great legend who did not have big names in his team at all. No one expected them to win.
Shane Warne, may he rest in peace.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greatest New Zealand captain.
Oh, okay. Greatest New Zealand captain. I'm again thinking about my own time of watching Dan Vettori.
Interesting. This was not in the leading
Because he
options.
was a captain when I was watching. Cricket. Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, there's obviously Kane Williamson who comes a bit later.
Yeah.
He's the captain during the 2019 World Cup and 15 World Cup as well. And now it's Mitch Santner, who I don't mind, but
I like him.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Greatest fast bowler of the 21st century.
That has to be Bumrah.
Yeah. You already sort of mentioned that, so.
It can't be anyone else.
Okay. Awesome.
I mean, some people might say Brett Lee, Gun McGrath and all those people, but it's Bumrah.
Yeah. The other options were James Anderson, Dale Steyn.
Oh, so Dale Steyn is okay. Dale Steyn maybe is still the greatest. Bumrah just needs 10 more test matches.
Yeah.
15 more test matches to supersede him.
Okay. Now we enter the this or that round. Okay. So 5 quick questions, and then you just have to pick one of the two. Okay. Worst cricket commentator,
Oh my God.
Sanjay Manjrekar or Kevin Peterson?
Oh,
Worse.
no. Kevin Peterson is worse because he's earlier on in his broadcasting career, and he's more prone to being kicked out of the team for being inappropriate or having outbursts on the mic.
Yeah.
But I think Manjrekar is more annoying.
Yeah.
But he's the worst commentator, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What's more ideal to save a match? Dhoni's calm or Kohli's aggression?
To save a match, I think that Kohli's approach, I think Kohli is good and most effective, actually not when he's being aggressive, which is interesting because he is almost unbeatable when he is chasing in ODIs. And often the thing that's propelling him is not his aggression. It's him understanding his own game and the motion of the game so well, knowing when to accelerate, knowing when to take singles. He has perfected that art. And I think that does not have anything to do with aggression. So I'm actually going to say Dhoni's calm.
Okay. Interesting.
Also, Dhoni's calm paved the way for Kohli to turn into who he was.
That's
so
true.
one thing enabled the other.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Eden Gardens or Wankhede, the more iconic Indian venue?
You know what's interesting is that Eden Gardens has one of the most iconic test matches ever played in India, which is India versus Australia 2001, which is notable because we had to follow on.
Yeah.
Follow on means we scored, the difference between the two teams at the end of the first innings was more than 200 runs.
Yeah.
And the opponents, i.e. Australia, they can make us bat again.
Yeah.
Right. So we batted again and VVS Lakshman and Rahul Dravid, like they put on this insane stand of like some 500, 600 runs. VVS Lakshman scores 280 and we win the match. We win the match after following on. So that's Eden Gardens. Eden Gardens is also like, interestingly enough, in 1987, when we hosted the World Cup, neither India nor Pakistan made it to the final, but we did play in the semis. So ultimately, the final was between England and Australia, but you still had 100,000 people over there, you know?
Yeah.
So like, it was a neutral match, but 100,000 people in attendance. Wankhede is where you win the World Cup, ultimately. But
that's true.
Wankhede is also a newer stadium. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
It came up in the 70s. So it's interesting because I think that both are like important for Indian cricket. I'll say Eden Gardens. I think Eden Gardens. Yeah. It's been around for longer.
It's been around for longer. It's also the bigger stadium, if I'm not wrong.
So yeah, it was like one of the only stadia in the world that had like 100,000 capacity. And
wow.
And like it's Bombay is like the birthplace, I guess, of like professional Indian cricket. But Calcutta, I think, is like both of them like share a history. But I would say Eden Gardens for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is tougher to face? Shoaib Akhtar at his fastest or Muralidharan on a turning pitch?
I think Shoaib Akhtar.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was easy. I just like I have like I just love fast bowling and I do think that like a very fast bowler is more exciting to watch than even like a spin wizard. You know what I mean?
Tougher to face.
Yeah, like he was bowling at like 160 kilometers per hour.
That's
okay.
Crazy.
Like he was injuring people.
That's insane. Okay, last question.
Yeah.
Which I feel like was jeopardized by the first question that I asked you. But I don't know. I'm curious if you still feel the same way. Rahul Dravid, the coach or the batsman?
Oh, I think the coach.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say batsman after your first answer, but yes.
I enjoyed Rahul Dravid as a batsman a lot. Also, again, this is my personal bias because the first time I followed like an Indian tour, test cricket tour, was India and England 2011. We got whitewashed 4-0. And the only saving grace was Rahul Dravid, who scored like 3 centuries and like 435 runs or something throughout the tournament. So, and everybody around him was like falling down and like losing their wickets. He was the only one who performed. That's where that comes from. But I do think that Rahul Dravid as a coach and Rohit Sharma as captain were able to like create the kind of like environment which is more like long lasting and sustainable than just like a winning mentality. Right? I feel like the team looks like they have fun playing with each other, which I think is a lot more intangible than just saying we need to win everything. Right?
Yeah.
Like we remember Rahul Dravid for like he won the 2024 World Cup, but like the fact is like they were runners up in 2023. They absolutely like decimated England when they came for the test tour in between. And also I think that the fact that he bowed out, you know what I mean? Like his contract ran out. Like this is just like the kind of coach you want, like a person who has like priorities straight. And a lot of like cricketers who worked with him say that we learned a lot about life, not just cricket from him. So yeah, I think Rahul Dravid, the coach.
Yeah, I love him too. He's the best. Okay, amazing. Those are my questions with the help of our friend who must not be named.
Do you want to hear some like 2011 era cricket blogging, like some
yes,
choice
absolutely.
Quotes?
I also feel like these blog quotes should be turned into a carousel and cemented on our social media page. So we shall do this.
This can be like our post. This can be like our postscript, like the after credits.
Indeed.
Yeah. So wait, just some context. So my blog used to be called Cricket XX because I was a girl writing about cricket, and XX is two X chromosomes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so the inspiration for the blog comes from like this like section of the Cricinfo website called Page 2, which was like, it was the page 2 of Cricinfo where people were writing like sarcastic, funny articles. So I also think like cricket really lends itself well to like mockery and making fun of yourself and self-deprecating humor. And I used to like reading that kind of stuff, like, like Terry Pratchett and stuff. So I wanted to write like that. So I used to always try to write something funny.
Okay.
So yeah, just some choice quotes from my blog writing. And bear in mind, this is like a 17-year-old, the confidence of a 17-year-old to like say some of these things. So I wrote an article about like England, a series of between England and West Indies. And the title is called Bipolar Windies. This is my blog title. And the captain at the time of the West Indies was Darren Sammy. He's the current head coach. So this is what I wrote. Darren Sammy has a way of making this team seem to be capable of great things. They don't buckle down and spread themselves on the ground to present a new assortment of doormats. They try to best their rivals with whatever little ammunition they have in their arsenal. This is what I wrote.
Wow.
Then there is I wrote a blog post about like England against Pakistan. At that time, I think they had lost a whole bunch of matches. So the title of the blog post was "Number 1, You're Joking." The English captain at the time was this guy called Andrew Strauss, and this is what I wrote about him. Andrew Strauss's form has larger and larger question marks beside it, and his captaincy doesn't seem to be adorned with exclamation marks and little hearts and arrows either. He now needs to sort out his form and these losses. No one wants an out-of-touch captain in a losing side. We can take one without the other, but both, that's just a slow death.
Oh my God.
In the same article, while describing Kevin Peterson, I wrote,
You would have been a Twitter phenomenon.
I
Had
wrote,
Twitter existed.
it did exist.
It
I
did
just
exist.
I just
you just weren't
know.
on it.
I was
Yeah.
on it. I would just be like, here's the link to my blog. I wouldn't like take excerpts from it, And also this is the early Twitter, so their character length was incredibly low. So anyway, in the same article, while describing Kevin Peterson, I write, I am not envious of any team which has to manage Kevin Peterson. The man is like an unstable frequency polygon. Do you know what that is? I had to remind myself what that is. So in maths and stats, imagine an X and a Y axis, and you're tracking the frequency of something. And if you have a bar chart, like the top of the bar graph, is like the number, the frequency or the number. So
Yeah.
I'm saying it goes up and down. So what I'm
Oh.
essentially saying, and the shape that it forms below, if you like trace the points on top of it, I'm explaining it very badly. But
Yeah.
like basically, I'm trying to say this man either scores like very low or very high. He's like unable to like be
This is
consistent.
the most math nerd thing a person has written.
I'm not
ever.
even a maths nerd,
I know, but
but I understood it enough to make to turn
this
it
joke.
into like
Terry Pratchett, who, bro? Like
Yeah.
seriously, yes.
Then I started also, the more I wrote, I decided I'm going to get into like some cricket analysis. So this is titled Whitewash, the sequel.
Hmm.
That's because we had been whitewashed in England and then we were whitewashed in Australia. And that
What does it
seemed
mean to be whitewashed?
to lose all your matches, to lose every match.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So this is my analysis. Okay. Once this team returns to India, the Indian team should start its transitory process. Ajinkya Rahane, Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma look to be the perfect replacements for Dravid, Sachin and Lakshman. It is the indiscretion of the board, selectors, and indeed even the players that has put Indian cricket into this awkward situation where there is a huge loss of experience and an influx of inexperience into the side. Also, I think Dhoni should be relieved of his test captaincy. He doesn't enjoy it as much as his one-day responsibilities, and his keeping and batting techniques have suffered. With the current team, he literally has no fielders to set an effective field, and he seems to be a man who likes energy, momentum, and a lot of things happening around him. This soporific brand of test cricket has depressed and demotivated him as a player and a captain. Maybe the younger guys might bring in some energy, which might help in lifting the spirit of the Indian captain. This is what I was writing. I was like, axe them.
I know.
Okay. Then in the same series, one of the losses was in Perth, Australia. That match, that blog post was called "The Indian Ruins at Perth."
Okay.
And in that, I write, the only innings of some substance was played by Virat Kohli, the youngest player in the side. From the first day at Melbourne till today, he has shown a marked improvement. Why? Because there is some sort of scope for it.
Okay.
I was right. And then...
This is biting commentary.
Okay.
My lord.
Then this is the first ever blog post I wrote, which is when I think I think this was the first or second match that we lost in that tour of Australia. I think after I had watched enough cricket, that's when I started writing about it. This blog post is called A Depressing Story. And I write, the batting lineup, which is supposedly the main cause of nightmares experienced by bowlers all over the cricketverse, has failed again and again and again and
A few moments later.
and again and again and again. Did I get that 12 times? So this is how I was writing.
I really love it. And I just will say, I think you got to bring it back, man. To our listeners,
Yeah.
if you have stuck with us, if you think Sanaya should bring her blog back, write into us and let us know, please. DM us, tweet at us, email us. You should let us know. So
Yes.
Sanaya can bring her blog back by popular demand.
Eagerly
No.
waiting for
Yes,
fan
indeed.
responses.
Well, thank you so much for all your dispersing, like not dispersing. What is the word? Wow. For giving me your knowledge of cricket. I think I feel like I know a little bit more about it now than before, and hopefully our viewers also, listeners, viewers also technically, if some of these reels go online, feel the same way. But this was really fun.
Much obliged. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. Girls played well. Will they say that? Will they say that? I don't know.
Inshallah.
Inshallah they will. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. Thanks so much for listening. Thinking People podcast is hosted by Sanaya Chandar and Ketki Sharma. Our producer for this episode is Saurav Das.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio content. Be sure to follow us at Thinking People Pod on Twitter or X and at Thinking People Pod on Instagram. If you'd like to get in touch, write to us at thinkingpeoplepodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode.